I will today be giving a talk about design for all and how to design for human diversity, social inclusion, and equality. So that's a big ask. So we'll see how much in detail I can go. But my topics today will be why am I particularly talking about this? What is design for all and why is it relevant? Then I'll be giving you some examples. First of all, ones that I think are good examples. Then I'll go to the bad examples from which I think that we can all learn the most. Then I'll give you some tools that you can use in your daily business. And lastly, I'm hoping for a lot of questions and an open and fruitful discussion. So we'll see about that. First, about me. My name is Carola Breuer, and I'm a user experience and service designer at uIdeation. And why am I talking about this topic? It's an interesting question, which I can answer with actually a couple of things. So in my education as well as in my professional life, I have both been fortunate enough to have a lot of touch points with the topic. So beginning in my master's program at TU Delft, I had a lot of cool courses like design for emerging markets and culture sensitive design. I also went to a collaborative course with the University of Tehran in Iran, which was a very cool experience in regards of that. I also worked at BSH Home Appliances, so Bosch and Siemens for the ones of you who don't know it under that name. And there already was part of a group for Design for All. And within that, I also organized an exhibition there to raise awareness among engineers and designers for people with disabilities in the development process of new appliances, since that is often an overlooked issue. And in my current position as UX and service designer at uIdeation, I really like that it's an even broader way of looking at the topic. And it's something that's quite important to the agency and to consider in the whole digital product process. So additionally to all of that, I'm also, privately, or however you want to say that, a member of the LGBTQI community, which makes diversity and inclusions topics that I come across quite often in my free time. So we can, of course, have a fight about whether this qualifies me for this talk, but I would definitely like to start with a definition about what design for all actually is and what it does and why we should care about it. So design for all helps to design for human diversity, social inclusion, and also equality. And it is the conscious and systematic effort to proactively apply principles, methods, and tools to promote universal design, which in turn aims to make products accessible to all people, regardless of age, disability, or other factors. I promised this was the only dry slide that I have to offer for you, because I want to continue with why us? Why do we need to care about this? And I think that's a really important issue, because as designers, we really cannot avoid designing for all sorts of different people. We never know who is going to use our product in the end. And therefore, I think it's really important to consciously think about our target group. Who might they be? And to also include diversity in there. This slide, I think some of you may have already come across in their previous life before this talk. So it's quite an important issue to talk about equality versus equity, because treating everyone the same might be the first step, but often it's not a good enough solution. So if we look at the sketch, I think it perfectly explains the situation. If we talk about equality, then it means giving the same solution to everyone. So in this case, it's a square box to stand across the fence higher and see the soccer game that is running currently better. But if we talk about equity, then it means giving everyone the same access to the soccer game. And that might include a different solution. So for the really short guy, it's a double box, whereas the really tall guy doesn't need a box at all. So this is a really interesting point that we also need to consider. So I think learning by doing is always the best. So I would like to share some examples with you, and I will start with the good ones to illustrate all the problems that can occur and also some good solutions that are already out there. Obviously, with some self-praise, I would like to start with a project of my own. I promise it's the only one. So this project, it's about gender inequality. And as you can see, it's a toilet paper roll, because the task was to design a ritual with possibly minimal means and a great impact. So this is toilet paper that can be placed at a cafe or any other public space. And obviously, the issue of gender inequality is quite multi-layered. There are many stereotypes, they are reinforced by society, and they're really present in people's minds. Also, there are a lot of patterns of behavior that cause this inequality. So the toilet paper goes and gives kind of two slides. The first one is discussing an adjective, so for example, expressing feelings, and asking people to discuss, is this male or female? Thereby, it always gives one example that is typically associated with women in society, at least in our European, and one that is typically associated with men. And on the second slide, to make it more objective, it gives a fact. Also there, in comparison, one that's good for women and one that's good for men. So in this example, it is in most countries, women only earn between 60 and 75% of men's wages for the same work. We also call that gender pay gap. An example for the men would be that most prison inmates are actually male, and that's by a percentage that is pretty unbelievable. So must also be something wrong there. Of course, this toilet paper won't by itself solve the problem of gender inequality, but it gives people the opportunity to read about gender inequality in a situation where they are by themselves and where they usually have time and nothing else to do. Then it encourages them, hopefully, to think about it. And since they are in a public place, to also come out of the toilet and possibly discuss with the person that they are in the cafe with. And then lastly, in an optimal case, they would use the hashtag flush gender inequality and also discuss about it in social media. So thereby the message would be spread worldwide. And yeah, it's actually a ritual of doing something that is long overdue, which is flushing gender inequality and also stereotypes down the toilet, quite literally. So as I promised, this is the last work of my own. The next thing I would like to talk is a voice that is called Q, the genderless voice. Because the use of voices in interfaces as well as video materials is a really interesting case, because if we look at it, then typically women's voices are used to sell things or make things sound sexy, whereas men's voices are used to sound serious and explain stuff. So that's obviously sexist and promotes stereotypes, which is why some genius person invented Q, the genderless voice. And yeah, I think that's an excellent example of how to do it right. So without me explaining further, I am going to show a short video of Q, the genderless voice. And I hope that you can all see it and hear the sound. If not, please notify me.
Although I have typically female biological sex characteristics, my gender identity is non-binary. I am not a man or a woman. This bill is a victory and an important step towards equality.
Alexa, what's in the news today? California begins issuing state IDs with a third gender
Colorado
option.
becomes fifth state to allow third gender on licenses.
Germans can now choose third gender option on legal records.
I'm Denmark's tech ambassador, which is a relatively new position.
I research human behavior with emerging technologies.
It's basically about keeping the technology companies responsible. And what we would argue is that they need to take a societal responsibility which is proportional to the kind of influence they exercise.
Companies turn to different types of research that tells them people expect a female voice. Sometimes we go back to these stereotypes, and what happens is we're reinforcing them. We're not changing them. There's no reason we can't have more options.
Audio researchers defined a frequency range which is neutral. We recorded several voices, worked on the pitch, we worked on the format filter, and we worked on the tone of the voice. We tested several different voices on thousands of people to create a gender-neutral voice.
Yeah, society always wants to put you in a box.
I hope that people would not assume gender based on voices more in the future.
Things move into a genderless world.
My voice is more than a pre-assigned gender.
My voice is more than a box to click.
My voice is more than this
or that. It's everything in between.
It's a voice of progression.
A voice of hope.
A voice that moves us forward when others are looking back.
Hi, I'm Q.
So I think this is a really good example of how you can do things better and how you can also use modern technologies to make things better. But obviously the issue is bigger than only gender. So I also want to give some other examples. I think another very good example is the iReport app. I'm not sure if you have heard of it since it's from Ireland. But I think this is another example of how modern tools can give a new approach to solve problems that have been there forever or for a very long time. And yeah, iReport launched in 2013, and it's an app to confidentially report racism in Ireland. So it enables people who experience or witness racism and or those supporting them to do something about it and break the silence, which is kind of a first step. It's a national, confidential, and user-friendly way to report racism from any online device. And it's then the results are actually used to monitor racism in Ireland. And that's really good because it's kind of a step to provide evidence and data on racism in Ireland. Because if there's no evidence and no data, then it didn't happen, I guess. So that's a really important step. And thereby it also counters an increase in racism and hardening of racist attitudes and responds to the need to focus the discussion on finding solutions to racism. Obviously, it's not a solution for everything, but it's at least a step in the right direction and shows us how we can use tools for this. Which brings me to my next slide, the bad examples. Unfortunately, there's a lot of them around, but in my opinion, they are even, at least for us here, more valuable than the good ones, because in order to learn from their mistakes, we can really use them as a good example, especially since many of them do so much wrong that we can learn a lot more than from one good example. So I will start with Pokemon Go. Who would have thought that? Not sure how many of you already knew that one, but yeah, Pokemon Go is a very popular game app in which players can collect Pokemons while walking around their city. And it was actually praised for its positive impact of having people go outside finally And it also really had positive publicity for its novelty and the innovation in the app and game industry. So you might ask, yeah, but what's wrong with it? And that's where we find the problem, because unfortunately it favored upper class white neighborhoods in the US and actually had more Pokemon there. Black players had fewer training centers and more sparsely found Pokemons in their neighborhood, while the white people had all the Pokemon in their neighborhoods. So the algorithms there were written and trained by people who did not belong to these minorities. And therefore they used their own behavior as the model, probably not even aware of this bias they were creating, but we call that coding bias. Probably many of you have heard about it. There's a whole movie about it on Netflix. So feel free to watch that. It's an issue that is very much in discussion at the moment in the press. It's the same issue that is responsible for this terrible app called Sketch Factor. Fortunately, it has already been removed, but it really gives an example of how meaning well can cause exactly the opposite. And also how much impact design can also have in a negative direction when it's really not thought through. Because Sketch Factor was meant to help users improve their safety by avoiding places that were reported as sketchy by other users. But what actually happened was the opposite, because it made the tool an app for promoting segregation and stereotypes, because people actually reported sketchy behavior and gave really unfocused complaints about snotty people or called out strangers who were acting creepy, and thereby really promoted stereotypes by letting people judge others based on their appearance or their neighborhood instead of their actual personalities and real character of the neighborhood. Also, this app was created by 2 millennials. So yeah, we can see where that problem is going. But I would also like to talk about a problem from the product design world that goes more into cultural difficulties. Because during a charity project, and this is unfortunately quite a common problem that happens often, European designer tried to improve a sewing machine that was used in Southeast Asian factories by women. And probably this is not the image of the exact sewing machines, but these things were really big and really creepy, and they often broke down. So the workers actually had to fix them. And while doing that, they often got injured and even up to losing a hand or something. So it was really terrible, and something had to be done about these sewing machines. So the European designer went there and thought like, oh, crap, we have to do something against this. We have to make these machines more user-friendly. We have to obviously let them stop harming people and see what we can do. So the designer came up with a solution which they thought like, oh yeah, perfect. Made a really small, neat sewing machine that could do all the things that the big and crazy harmful machine could do. But what actually happened was really problematic, because the machines were used in the Muslim community by women. So going outside to work gave the women an excuse to go outside at all. When these machines became so small that they could also be used from home, the woman couldn't go outside anymore. Also, the machines were previously kind of giving the woman respect, because people who could use a machine that was that big and that scary, that's something cool, that's a good job that they were doing. But when they were using these small, tiny sewing machines at home, people entirely lost this respect. And the thing that is probably the worst is that the machine was now so small and so user-friendly that it could also be used by children. So that encouraged child labor and was actually kind of the worst part of all of that. And of course, none of this was the designer's intention, but through not knowing the context and the culture well enough, they actually made some really poor choices in their design and actually made matters worse. So I think this is a really important example to know, because often as designers, we go into a different culture and we assume that we can help them, but it's not actually that easy. So therefore, I would like to introduce some tools to you guys, because I think there is many of them available and they can really, really help us. I think the easiest tool that is there and that we kind of don't need anything for is extreme users. So just imagining who could be the youngest, the oldest, the most illiterate, and so on, edge case user that my product or service will be used by. And how can I make it work for this group? What can I maybe learn from this group for my average user? Because oftentimes this is a real chance that we get there, because designing for a person who only has one arm and has a disability with this can also help us to think about other users who only have a temporary disability, such as a broken arm, which will heal in half a year, or even people who are just disabled in this very moment by, for example, carrying a shopping bag. And that's a really interesting thing, because if you look at the percentage of people with disabilities, then you might argue, but it's only a few people. Do I really have to factor that in? But if you think about the temporary and even the shopping bag person, then this is a really huge percentage of people for whom your product can be improved. And coming back to the thing about culture and context, I would also love to give you some advice there, because a lot can go wrong. And therefore, it always makes sense to investigate the factors of culture and context. And a really helpful tool for that is crossing cultural chasms. And because you seem to like the first video, I'll go with the second one.
As designers, we always try our best to find out what end users want, as well as what they need. But do we always understand exactly what it is that matters to them? We are, after all, often outsiders in an increasingly multicultural and globalized environment. The traditional design research we carry out can get us closer to understanding what users need, but it is rarely enough. Users' cultures can express themselves in many different ways. We just need to look more attentively and get closer to achieve acceptable results. We have produced a card set, a hands-on tool that helps designers cross the cultural chasms to achieve effective user-product interaction in any cultural context. These 3 sets of 16 cards each let you see beyond the obvious. They give you a lens to examine your user's culture and ultimately help you connect with your intended users, so you can avoid culture-related mismatches and, moreover, find new and even better solutions. With visual explanations and examples, every card helps you find how relevant culture can be for your project and which cultural aspects matter the most. Whether alone or in a team, with a card set, you can work faster, with greater confidence, and use the potential of culture to produce effective designs.
So like all the tools that I will talk about, this is available for free online. So there is no reason not to use it. So do take a look. And yeah, since many of us here work in the digital environment, I think it is also a nice example to look at this tool, which is a holistic tool set for designers to design for the next wave of internet users in emerging markets. Because something that we often don't think about is that these people might be using a smartphone as a group, or they might speak different languages, they might be illiterate, or maybe it's their first time using the internet. So this is also a really interesting use case to design for, and something that we should really look into. And as you know me best, another video.
Today, more than 1 million people will come online for the first time in their lives. 1 million people, largely from emerging markets and increasingly from rural areas. 1 million people who often speak multiple languages, but struggle to read or type. 1 million people whose first and only exposure to the digital world is through their phone. Let's imagine today is your day. After dreaming about this moment and saving up for months, your first smartphone lights up in your hands. But as confusing shapes and words appear, you start to feel overwhelmed. Is this new world really for you? You've heard you can chat with your friends, but don't know where to tap or how to begin. You've heard you can buy goods, but aren't sure what all these symbols mean. You've heard you can pay your local shopkeeper, but don't trust that the money will actually get there. These challenges require a new way of designing, one that works for everyone, regardless of where they live, what language they speak, or which device they use. Introducing the Digital Confidence Design Tools. Developed by IDEO, Google, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, these tools help teams design digital services for the next wave of internet users. Use them to focus your design challenge, structure your process, build user empathy, get inspired, generate new ideas, and develop success criteria. Product teams are already taking advantage of the digital confidence design tools to solve exciting challenges. The next wave of internet users is already coming online. Are your products ready?
So, some interesting questions there. I hope there was a tool in there for you. Coming to the end of my talk, I would like to talk about our responsibility, which is, in my opinion, obviously it is extra effort to design for an audience beside the main target group, but we really come into the development process early on where it's still possible to make considerations. And if we go at it this early, then a little can go a long way. Whereas if we look at it really late in the product development process, then things are often already done and nothing can be incorporated anymore. So therefore, I think it is our responsibility to address this topic and highlight any possible issues and also be aware of them. I think personally that the emphasis phase is a good point to start thinking about all customers, and then obviously also keep them in mind throughout the design process. Whenever possible, it's also obviously great to include design for all in the testing phase. So to also include some users that fit these criteria that you're thinking of. And personally, I think in times where we are creating really thoroughly thought through products with the perfect user experience, and I'm sure that's why all of you are here, I think this topic should not be seen as a burden, but actually as a chance to include as many users as possible, because this is really what can differentiate a product from its competitors and can really make a product awesome. Because more often than not, this inclusion also creates a profit in ways that were not even possible to anticipate. So thinking about the person with the shopping bag. And yeah, therefore, I hope I could leave at least a little impact on you guys and help you to include this in your future design process. And now I would be open and hoping for many questions and a good discussion.